Hello and welcome to Blockchain Gaming World episode 199. I'm your host John Jordan. Don't forget to check out my daily email about blockchain gaming. You can find that at gamestx.substack.com. In today's episode I'm talking to Rob Whitehead. So Rob is a co-founder at UK tech company Improbable. He's also CEO of Improbable company MSquared, working with Yuga Labs on its Otherside metaverse, and is also involved with Somnia, which is Improbable's blockchain. So quite a sort of a mashup of different companies that are part of Improbable. But in this episode, I'm talking really to Rob on a technical level, as much as I can at least, because Rob was the CTO of Improbable, and that's his focus. And so we're talking about what he's seen really over the last 15 years working in this sort of space of virtual worlds and metaverse and whatever sort of terms we've used for it. And what's interesting, I think, is how he talks about how we've moved from sort of a technologies where we could have 100 people in one sort of gaming space to now technologies where we could have thousands or potentially even tens of thousands of people in the same sort of concurrent virtual world metaverse, however you want to describe it. Obviously, this being a blockchain podcast, we also then look to see how blockchain is becoming an integral part of this, and how sort of Improbable as just a tech company started to think about blockchain and how blockchain would sort of fit into its sort of suite of technologies, and since how it's gone on to launch Somnia, which is in its testnet, and really how a combination of all these different technologies can now sort of allow developers to come up with some quite radical new ways of making these sort of mass scale experiences, and in particular with the speed of Somnia as a blockchain, start putting a lot more things on chain. We talk particularly about a project called Chunked, which is a sort of a fully on-chain version of Minecraft that MSquared has launched. And in that game, everything, all the movements, all the sort of all the sort of elements of the game, everything in there is fully on-chain. So that's sort of giving us a taster for where things might be going in the coming years. So hope you enjoy the podcast. Do subscribe, but on with the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to the show. Very pleased I have Rob from. You tell us what you are, because you're sort of you have lots of hats. So you sort of you have Improbable
Indeed.
and MSquared, and sort of Somnia fits in there as well. And so you explain a little bit about how you fit into the corporate structure.
Yeah, for sure. So hey, I'm Rob. I'm co-founder of Improbable, which is a virtual world technology company that's been around for about 13 odd years these days. And these days I'm serving as CEO of MSquared, which is our subsidiary specifically focusing on metaversal platform technology and essentially building the underlying plumbing that's going to tie the next generation of virtual worlds together.
Yeah. So actually, earlier this year we had Herman on, so he sort of gave an overview of some of the,
Oh, brilliant!
Some of this sort of like how sort of Improbable's become, what do you call it, like a sort of a venture company with these sort of other subsidiaries in there. So go back and check out that episode if you sort of want the more, I wouldn't say corporate, but the an alternative view to Rob. But as you say, you and Herman and a few others started out Improbable sort of way back in the day. So do you want to give us a bit of a sort of a potted history? Maybe not too much detail because we'll probably go into some of it, but it is quite interesting history from a Improbable. People may have heard of Improbable as a sort of UK technology company that's sort of hit the headlines with some of its funding and then been a bit quieter for other things. But you've done a lot of interesting stuff in that period of time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of my personal background, always been like a massive virtual world enthusiast. I joined Second Life for better or worse when I was 14 years old. And, made some money being a virtual arms dealer, oddly enough. It's maybe a story for another time. But, I was there for when Second Life really popped off in the kind of mid-2000s, and it sort of suffered from its own success. That there were ultimately some technology limits at the time where they weren't able to really scale in terms of, getting people in the same parts of the world for big experiences that had big celebrities show up. And it really got me thinking, through college about what like a new version of the technology might be like. Met Herman, and then to the bewilderment of my family, moved into his house when I graduated, and the rest is history. So we ended up building out a type of simulation engine which we used for a bunch of different things, ranging from building game worlds and virtual worlds, but also it had applicability for things like real world simulation and all sorts of other applications. And these days it was around lockdown, we had a new breakthrough technology called Morpheus, where whilst we'd worked on building these massive wide game worlds. We'd never been able to solve density, which is bringing everybody into the same space at the same time. And we thought it was pretty timely during lockdown, the one time that we all can't gather as human beings. Trying to build a digital version of that felt really relevant. And yeah, it was fantastic to see what we were able to do with that. We could have 10, 20,000 people all able to see each other, interact with each other. And then we were thinking to ourselves, like, what do we do with this? Do we just go and try and sell it to game studios, maybe make the world's largest Battlefield game? But there's probably more interesting things you can do with people gathering. If you think about the real world, why do we gather? There's conferences, concerts, rallies, all these different use cases, which are a little bit more social. And, this was when the metaverse terminology was really hyping up, 21, 22. And based upon that, we were able to do a fundraising round for what became MSquared, which is the underlying, technology there. And that's now spun out into its own thing.
Mm-hmm. No, it's good to sort of, probably for a lot of people listening, maybe Second Life is something that is, they sort of haven't come across. But sort of at the time, I guess it would certainly be ranked among sort of a technology that was ahead of its time, although it was, to some degree, so you say broadly successful. It was sort of, an MMORPG, but wasn't sort of, it was more open than sort of gamey. It was probably, I don't know if we were using the term metaverse then, we probably were, but there were people
metaverse was a cool term, and then it got uncool again, and then it got cool again. It's definitely gone through some cycles at this point.
But I remember, there were, not to say, I can't remember exactly what the companies were, but some consulting companies were setting up offices in there, and I think even maybe some countries were setting up sort of ambassadorships in there. It's sort of, we look back now and it's sort of like quite a lovely sort of naive sort of but a lot of the spirit was there, right? As in, like, okay, it was before crypto, so they had to do a lot of work to get like sort of the Linden dollar into essentially was a form of cryptocurrency, which is technically implemented differently. People saw it as the next evolution of the internet. It was going from 2D to an immersive space where you can hang out with people. And it was just, it was really ahead for its time. And I think, these days, like fasting forward, we have a lot more technology foundations to lean on that is going to make this stuff, sort of a lot more viable. Yeah. No, I remember that spiraling out of control. One of the companies, actually, the payment company behind Lindendal is now a blockchain company. I'm not quite sure how successful they've been, but they are like a payment company being used by a few people because I guess they were dealing with those sort of issues of sending small amounts of money around the world sort of earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay, so. Without sort of showing my technical inability, but you mentioned it sort of a few times that there's some of the technology sort of wasn't there, and I guess one of the interesting things for the sort of stuff you're doing is there's obviously you're building sort of software and sort of servers and clients, but obviously you're building on top of a whole bunch of sort of low level sort of infrastructure. So can you maybe give us a sort of an idea about sort of what's happening on that lower level? Because obviously that's sort of been foundational, and obviously we throw in terms like AWS now and Azure and all that. I don't no idea the difference between those two or what's going on there. But maybe in a broad sort of schema, can you sort of tell us how that's sort of led us to where we are now?
Yeah. So typically, when you're playing a video game like Fortnite or PUBG, you're downloading a client that is a game engine, like something like Unreal Engine, and then you're connecting to a single kind of instance of Unreal Engine, which is also running in the cloud. It's running in the cloud, without any graphics, but it's running the logic of the world. Yeah. And that's typically how most game worlds are built. And if you're doing something that's high fidelity, you can get maybe 100 odd people, 150 people in one session. You see that number battered around, PUBG, Fortnite, Call of Duty. It's kind of, it's a funny thing because you'd think like, oh, these are completely different companies, completely different technologies. Why is it that number? It's kind of a mathematical rule that kicks in, which is when you double the amount of people in the space, you quadruple the amount of data you need to send. Yeah. So you start to hit these kind of fundamental limits pretty fast. And one of the insights we had was trying to build servers which don't just use one computer in the cloud, but actually use a cluster of them, which all cooperate together to simulate and network something much bigger than any single one of them could deal with. And there's many ways of doing that, and there's some ways which work better, there's some ways that work worse. That was kind of one of the key things we were able to leverage to kind of build these super scale virtual spaces that we were putting together. You can think of us as we're using, existing cloud hardware, so essentially computers that run in the cloud, but it's building the magic layer on top that stitches them all together to build these, really large living spaces, and then building development tools so that if you're a developer who knows how to use Unreal Engine or Unity or anything, you can plug in these new engine technologies we have to make them be possible. And then there's probably another angle here, which is around like the economic layer. This is where I think increasingly like blockchain technologies are getting interesting. There's an interesting thought. If you were to make something like Second Life or EVE Online again today, you'd probably use Web3. It's got a lot of the solutions around allowing user-generated economies, sharing value, buying and selling things. All that stuff is super baked in. So you can see us as kind of like a layer of technology that sits on top of these foundational pieces.
We've had a Hilmar from CCP Games, who obviously are
doing amazing,
that with Eve Frontier.
Spent a lot of summers in my childhood mining asteroids and EVE Online as well. So definitely.
No, it is funny when you talk to people in blockchain as well. It's sort of some of these sort of MMORPGs where people were breaking all the ULAs and selling sort of items around. It does provide, I think, a sort of fundamental, sort of foundational sort of way of they grew up thinking around that, even though it wasn't properly owned stuff. But it's interesting how it often sort of crops back in. Anyway, so you've mentioned sort of the company. I mean, you're CEO of this company called MSquared. So can you tell us a little bit about? I guess in the sort of you're best known not just in the crypto space, but certainly in the crypto space for your work with Yuga Labs, which is coming to a fruition. I mean, this summer I think it's been. We won't go into all the Yuga stuff, but there's been a sort of a multi-year sort of co-development, I suppose, of the Otherside world. So, can you talk a bit about sort of MSquared in particular and how that because I guess Yuga is sort of your main client that you're best known for, at least at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. So MSquared, it was interesting. The original vision around MSquared when it first spun out was around actually building our own metaverse. We were seeing these are the ones around, and we were like, we've got this really powerful technology. Why don't we have our own play here? Yeah. And we very quickly realized there's a much better story to tell, which is rather than trying to be yet another, token-backed metaverse around, there was really missing an opportunity to build the underlying infrastructure that would tie all these different virtual worlds together.
Okay.
Maybe the marketing team wouldn't approve, but a metaverse, you could think of it as like almost like the EU of virtual worlds. So you want to have it.
Not sure the EU is the term we would be going for.
Yeah, we're not going to use that one then. Fine. But you can think of like how do you have it so that people's characters, inventories, and data can freely move between these different experiences. That's what really, to me, differentiates virtual worlds and the metaverse from typical gaming, is this idea of things connecting together and being greater than the sum of the parts. And that's kind of very quickly, once we met with Yuga Labs and saw the vision for what they wanted to do, we were like, look, actually, this is a much better story for us to tell. Yeah. It's going to be better for the whole ecosystem if we do this play. And then MSquared, now you can think of it as almost like it's Amazon Web Services for virtual worlds. We're trying to build the underlying technology layer that's going to allow virtual worlds to connect together. Mm-hmm. If we do our job well, like we're almost the hidden ingredient that means that your player profile in one world, when you go to another, you can still see your inventory and you can still use your character. Or the reason when you're playing a game, you can get thousands of people in one space. That's all the technology that we're backing, and we're essentially bringing that to different ventures and companies to go and do it. And we've loved this approach because the sheer diversity of experiences that people have now built on top of the tech, you could never do with a single business. So you've got Otherside, which is its own specific, Web3 centric IP and kind of gaming like experience. You've got Major League Baseball building a full baseball stadium experience that derives from their user base. There's projects like Jitter, which are dealing with taking Twitch streaming to a more immersive level where you can click a button in Twitch and then jump straight into a Twitch stream, kind of immersive experience running around with your host. Mm-hmm. You couldn't have one consumer, product be all those different things, but they share the same technology challenges. So that's kind of the level we've been operating at in terms of underlying pieces. Mm-hmm. And that range, the stuff we vend there ranges from, the world technology we talked about, like how do we get thousands of people in one spot and you can see them all, hear them all. Interoperability technology. So how do we make sure that the objects can go between different spaces, but they're moderated and safe to go into those spaces, and we've checked them that they're decent. Even things like avatar standards, so there's a common avatar. If you don't have your own, you can kind of use within your project. Mm-hmm. And there's an ever increasing set of things as well. Even looking into using blockchain. So I want to be putting my game data on chain, or I want to be putting my inventory on chain as a game dev. I don't really know about Web3. I'm not a Web3 company. How do I easily do that? There's some other services we're thinking about as well.
Because when you talk about sort of the metaverse, to some degree, probably people in the crypto space go, well, that's what the blockchain is. So,
yeah,
but
right?
I guess what you're saying, the blockchain is that sort of, and obviously we do sort of have that to some degree where, games, in a very light way, games like Pixels, you can pretty much not take any NFT from Ronin, but a lot of NFTs you can bring them into the game. So, but you're saying there's a lot of services around that.
I mean, it's one worth leaning into. You make a really good point, which is like the blockchain definitely is in the food chain. It's the very bottom of it, and when it comes to around portability of data, sovereignty, ownership, what's actually happened in the world, you can put that stuff on the blockchain, and that makes it extensible. It makes it something that people can like read into. It's auditable. But then there's a lot of what makes virtual worlds that you can't put on a blockchain, like a 3D model. So now I've got like a 10 megabyte avatar, which is, a piece of data. You can't jam that into the blockchain, but you still need to be able to talk about it. So then this is where we have our layers where, okay, we're like indexing all these different assets, but then we're putting on chain data to say, oh, this asset is, got adult content, or this asset is suitable for environments with kids, and that sort of thing. So we're trying to like sort of fill the missing gaps where the blockchain ends, and then the rest of the problems need to be solved on top. Which aren't necessarily on-chain, but they connect to the blockchain. Yeah.
And maybe to some degree that's been one of the problems with the blockchain people is they have their hammer and they go any sharp metal cylinder, they use their hammer for it, even and sort of end up with the problems because they maybe are a little bit sort of religious about we have to do it this way, sort of thing.
I think it's interesting, right? There's a whole movement around what if you tried to maximally put everything on the blockchain. So you've got the autonomous worlds movement and a lot of the projects based around there, and we've been looking at that as well. But the main issue typically has just been that blockchains don't have the performance capability to do it. So you're having these extremely like anemic experiences where the game is very, very minimal. It's essentially just a trading game with extra steps. But what we're seeing, with projects like Somnia, is you've now got this performance envelope where you can put things as fully on-chain games that you typically wouldn't have been able to do before. I think we'll probably talk about that in a little bit, but it's exciting times.
Yeah, no, we might as well bring it up now. But it's still the case. So Somnia is the very high performance sort of blockchain that you're I think still in testnet, isn't it? It's
getting very mature now, but it's still in testnet.
And sort of the big selling point is whenever there's a new blockchain, sort of my sort of view is for many years been saying, so why do we need another blockchain? But I guess the point of Somnium is it's coming from Improbable sort of background in doing all these distributed systems for decades, and it's just extremely fast. So I don't know. Lots of people say they're the fastest blockchain. I don't know whether you would claim that one, but it is very fast.
Yeah, I think we would. As in like so. There's hyperbolically saying we're the fastest, and then there's empirically saying the fastest, and we're like categorically, like empirically, the fastest block. Definitely fastest EVM blockchain on the planet. And it's not like a fake blockchain. It's like genuinely like an L1 blockchain, which at its core can go and do this stuff. But what you were saying before is definitely true. When I was talking about all this technology that lets us have tens of thousands of people in the same space. One of the ways we achieve that is through compression. So how do we take that data and crunch it down and really optimize, how these different systems are synchronizing with each other? You can take the same skill set and apply it to blockchains, and then you get something like Somnia, where it's just like, it's bleeding edge performance, super, super low level optimizations to make that possible.
And I just sort of what, in general, thinking about, sort of the arc of Improbable, which sort of said is the sort of a parent company of all this sort of stuff, and obviously you guys were working in these sort of distributed sort of computer systems and all this sort of stuff, and I kind of wonder, for you personally, what was your sort of view on sort of crypto and when Bitcoin sort of came out? Because some people I know who sort of quite interested in that field sort of had a sort of negative thing to it, or because various other sort of I guess attitudes around sort of crypto, and it's almost like, and some people I still know who are very into computer science and stuff, and they just think blockchain is sort of useless technology, and you guys you weren't early onto it because obviously you were building all these other things, but I just sort of wonder, someone who's obviously got spent decades doing computer science stuff since you were 14, how did you sort of get it?
I mean, I first heard about Bitcoin when I was in college, and someone was walking home from lectures being like, oh, have you heard about this thing called Bitcoin? It was when it was like, $0.1 or something insane. And I was just thinking like, this kind of weird nerd money. What is this thing? It makes absolutely no sense. It'll never catch on. And honestly, that's been a deeply humbling reflection in retrospect, when I kind of say this to a lot of people now. Any new idea is stupid until it's not.
Yeah.
The idea, again, people talked about AI. I remember leaving lectures around then. Oh, neural networks don't work. They reach a certain point and then they just cap out. I remember literally like that was the material we were like trained on. And then it's stupid until it's not. And then suddenly you have this breakthrough capability. And I think the same thing happened with cryptocurrency is, people thought it was a bit of a silly thing. And then suddenly, it's not. And it's because things iterate and things change. And the early versions of things always are stupid because they need to evolve and they need to adapt and they need to get better. But there are some like core principles there that are really solid. So yeah, it's something we kind of saw from the sidelines, throughout Improbable's history. And we saw it kind of slowly growing. But it was around the intersection of, say, there was DeFi and there was like all that kind of craze, but it was around when the metaverse hype started with this idea of like putting virtual worlds on the blockchain. That's when we were like, okay, we can't not get involved in this. Like a lot of the things that we brought to bear, are really kind of powerful tools. And a lot of the visions around things like interoperability, we were like, wait, this is actually the foundation systems to be building upon to make these sorts of things possible.
But I guess also as a sort of proper company who's raised, or whatever you've raised, certainly hundreds of millions of dollars of venture funding, I suppose there's an inherent conservatism that you wouldn't have if you were 10 years younger and you'd been a college student and then looking to a startup. You'd obviously done a crypto startup there's just sort of different.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound really, it's going to make me really old, but the thing that was really innovative when we were graduating was the cloud.
Yeah.
The idea that you didn't have data centers you physically owned and you were plugging cables into and you were going to some website with a credit card and buying magic computers that you can't see.
Yes.
We literally were being told that, oh yeah, it doesn't work. We were told you can't make games using the cloud. That was what we were being told. So, and we didn't know any better. And I think you kind of fast forward now, you're probably looking at the new generations of, developers going out there where maybe they're being told that, web3 is all a big scam and doesn't work. Or maybe they're being told that Gen AI is just this fad and no one's going to build anything of value on top of it. It's usually just how things start. And then when you get the big breakout success, everyone, reluctantly concedes that this thing actually was a useful thing after all.
I mean, just without over sort of playing this sort of line of inquiry, I mean, I think one of the things with blockchain is it's an argument actually I really dislike, but I can see the sort of nub of it. And people often say, you get in discussion, they go, well, no gamers don't care about if we're using Azure or AWS. They just care if it's a great game. And this is often talking about what blockchain you're on, and I really dislike this argument because obviously that's not. You can't buy a speculative token in AWS. I guess you can buy Amazon stock, I suppose, but there's a very different thing there. That one is a totally B2B business, and one is obviously a very sort of an aggressive leverage consumer-facing sort of investment sort of thing. So certainly with sort of Somnium again, how you guys have I think you've taken sort of some of the DJing culture, because that's sort of the culture of it, but not in terms of the token stuff. But that's, I imagine, quite a hard balance to sort of get right.
Yeah, it really is. I think the challenge about the people care about what blockchain they're on. A lot of the time, you think all these different L2s and things around. There's nothing. It's like selling bottled water. Like there's not really something that differentiates them as a product besides the branding and besides the community and the things on top. Because at the end of the day, they're just another EVM L2 or they're just another like subnet of some other chain. I think the thing with Somnia and what makes it different is because it's got this like multiple order of magnitude more performance capability. Like we're talking about like 1 million transactions per second. It's enabling like a whole new category of experience to be built. So, okay, blockchains typically have NFTs on them. So, okay, I own a hat and that's now represented something on chain. How about my metagame and progression? How about how many headshots I've gone and done? How about like my profile? How about my stats? How about my interactions with other people? These are things that'd be really interesting if they were on the blockchain because we could build all sorts of tools to analyze them and view them. You could speculate on them. You could build prediction markets on top of them, but no blockchain can do that. So then you kind of add that layer on top. And then you got the additional layer on top of that is not just the metadata, not just your progression, but the game itself can be on the blockchain. So now, in things like the Minecraft experience, the Trinket experience we built, you're running around placing blocks. That entire thing is now like a verifiable piece of computation. So you can again financialize it and you can add real money economies and all sorts of really interesting things on top of it. So I think for us, it's about blockchains need to bring more to bear than just a different level of branding and hype. It needs to be something where there is a new capability. And with Somnia, that's where we see that. It's not just about being yet another place to mint NFTs. It's about being a scope for a whole new class of, computation to be able to occur there.
And I guess coming back to distributed systems, I guess that, again, that's sort of, when you have that sort of fundamental sort of underlying sort of step change in what you can do. Again, then that takes a number of years for people to actually build out those sort of systems, because obviously, when it comes to like, here's a new NFT collection, buy it now and the price is going to go up. I mean, obviously any chain can do that, and that's just a purely speculative thing. But actually, it's going to take us 2 years to sort of develop the sort of the product layer around what we can do. I mean, that's sort of the
it's like there was some interesting quotes for the years. Just because you invented a chessboard doesn't mean you know how to play chess. So it's like once you unlock a new capability, there's a whole like new learning to be building on top of that. So we had our breakthrough tech, right? We suddenly, the dream we always really wanted, 10,000 people in the same virtual space. What do you do with it? Give them all guns. Doesn't pan out very well. But we conducted some experiential R&D where we were bringing in groups of testers in and trying different formats and different pieces, doing surveys to work out what types of mechanic resonated with large crowds, what things didn't. And that was a whole other journey. And I think we've hit the same thing now with fully on-chain experiences, where one of the things that we're partnered with Somnia for is pushing these boundaries. So maybe it's a good time to talk about like Chunked, and what we're building there was we asked ourselves like, what's like the maximal thing you could ever put on a blockchain that people wouldn't think was possible? And we were like, what if you could put like a full action immersive experience with loads of data? And we thought, why not, like a Minecraft like voxel world where you're running around, you're literally crafting things, you're digging stuff up, you've got durability of items, and even seeing other people around you walking and looking. What if we made all of that on the blockchain, where it's all a big verifiable computation, no roll-ups, no levels on top, just the actual raw underlying blockchain benching it. And that was something we were able to put together pretty fast. But it was again like learning about how to use this new capability to actually build experiences is itself an art. And we've built a bunch of technology to be able to interact with it. Some stuff we found really fun fact, right, is like when MetaMask or when these wallets interact with the blockchain, they typically wait like 4 seconds, a couple of seconds to wait for the response to come back, because blockchains are normally so slow that they don't need to. That's a very normal amount of time to wait. But when you're sending 30 transactions a second to move around in a voxel world, that thing is now like the actual dominating factor. So although Somnia itself had the raw performance, we're having to build the layers of technology back on top again. So we're having to sort of build our own RPC nodes that can handle that sort of scale. We're having to build libraries for JavaScript so we can actually send that amount of transactions and receive that amount of data. So it's been really, really interesting to see.
Yeah, so I did actually play. I didn't realize every move was a transaction. So
there is literally no server. So if you see someone looking up and down, that's on-chain data. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it was sort of quite a funny test, because it was this massive big world, but as you say, it's like a Minecraft sort of universe. But as things were mined out, you actually went down to the bedrock. So the point of the sort of first test was like everything in the game was mined, so you ended up in this sort of dystopian world where all you had was sort of the grey. It had been quite pretty when you came into it, and people were building stuff, and then there was nothing left.
I think there's probably some metaphor there, isn't it? But we did a bit of a kind of marketing activation with Somnia bringing their community in, and it turns out people love mining. So there was like tens of millions of blocks mined. There was like probably about 1,000 concurrent users peak. In terms of the space running around mining stuff, that'll be impressive for like, we talked about Fortnite having 100 people. This is, close to 1,000 people running on a fully on-chain world. So it was amazing to go and see. And we ended up having to turn the whole thing off because essentially it's just like complete anarchy. So we're working on our next iteration of that now with, slightly more checks and balances to check that people don't strip mine the entire thing to the bottom of the world.
But in the sense of sort of, you're talking about, you can have this technology, and then you sort of have to think about sort of what product and what game would you want thousands of people in the same space. But an overarching thing, fully on-chain Minecraft is sort of captures all of that. I mean, how long it would sort of sustain. Obviously, Minecraft, most people are sort of playing in a sort of solo mode. Obviously, you have server mode as well, but a lot of people, my kids, are playing sort of solo mode. But you can sort of see there's an immediate sort of to anyone in the gaming space. If you just say fully on-chain Minecraft, people will be, let's have a look at that then. I mean, that's...
Yeah, it's that's what we loved about it. It's just this vignette. It's like it's a really easy way of explaining it, and it's like, oh, cool. That means that like all my inventory is something that's extensible and ownable. It means that every single block is something that is verifiably like mined, so you can't like bot it and invent things out of thin air. It means that you can build different clients for it. So we made a simple web client. You could build in a real photorealistic version of it. You could build a stats app. You could build marketplaces. You could build prediction markets. You could build people like trading parts of the world. All these things that you can start to build on top. So yeah, we found it would just be a really good calling card for like what's possible, in that kind of superlative way. And I think it gets people thinking as well, like when you see these sorts of stunts, okay, maybe you don't want to do fully on-chain Minecraft, but if you can do fully on-chain Minecraft, what can you do? It's proving this watermark of capability where then, oh, actually I want to put all the data of my items on chain so I can do different things based upon that. That's definitely possible because we can do fully on-chain Minecraft. So that's definitely something that can be done.
And I think that probably, coming back to sort of where the blockchain games sort of industry now is we, using the metaphor again, we have totally mined out this sort of idea of let's mint some NFTs out and have a token and somehow tie that as an inventory perhaps into a what will be what we call sort of web sort of 2.5. But clearly that in most cases has absolutely not worked. There's not, the teams haven't been experienced enough, not had enough funding. There's not been a big enough audience. You can't get the web 2 people not interested in the blockchain or crypto bit of it at least, and then you can't really onboard them. And whereas something like this sort of gets you over that sort of, again, like what we talk about, a technical limitation of what you could sort of build with the current with that technology. And now we've moved on, to hopefully have something a bit more.
It's so I think what we've seen is it's all about existing teams and what they know and like what they're familiar with. So you're getting game teams that are typical Web2 game studios building really good experiences. Yeah. But when they think Web3, the only thing they know how to do is sellotape NFTs onto the side. Yeah. And those NFTs aren't interoperable. They don't have utility beyond the application. Yeah. It's just a way of essentially monetizing the experience. The other side is you have the pure Web3 crowd building fully on-chain experiences, but they're not game devs. So these things aren't necessarily that fun. They don't have really good on-ramps. To your point, it's like, oh, please buy this random token for my blockchain to play this game. And then already you've whittled down your audience to like 1% of possible people who could go and play it. And I think there's this middle ground we're trying to breed, which is we've got the experience in Web3, but also we've got like a decade of experience building online games as well and blending those things together so we can bring to bear like our game technology and game development knowledge. And then we can also bring to bear our Web3 knowledge and make things that are a lot more like compositional as they should be in Web3. So I think the best example I like to talk about for that is like DeFi. Like DeFi is actually one of the big success stories of Web3. Like, I make a exchange, you make a wallet app, someone else makes a marketplace, someone else makes a lending protocol. And like Lego pieces, they connect together. And without even having to cooperate, we're kind of building this thing, this whole ecosystem. And then if you map that onto, Web3 gaming, where's that composition? Where's that ecosystem happening? Really, like you make a game and you sell some NFTs. Great. Who's building the Lego blocks that are going to be sticking together? And it requires you to approach things a bit differently. You want to have it so the items actually have common standards in terms of how they visualize, what are their semantics. You want to have it so that there's like common, world technologies so that they can be loaded into different places. So that's kind of more what we're trying to be going after, is actually trying to build something more like what DeFi did for money. We're trying to do that for gaming. So it's actually having more of these compositional pieces.
And I guess it also makes it in some ways simpler for Web 2 companies, because on this sort of level where they can put everything on chain, then they're not sort of having to go, here's the Web 2 bit and here's the Web 3 bit, and how do we work out the interaction between them, and how do we make sure we can monetize on the Web 3 thing but doesn't annoy the Web 2? If you're just treating it like this is a server, this isn't like this is like AWS. In fact, it's on a blockchain. Means we might have these interesting composability issues or this interesting monetization option, but effectively we could just sort of run it as a web. It's exactly like a Web 2 game that happens to be on the blockchain. That sort of makes sense.
Yeah. No, I totally see that. It's the most difficult parts of Web 3 are when you're going between Web 2 and Web 3, because you no longer have the decentralized system. You never have that kind of decentralized trust. And then you're having to have random computers on the internet interacting with it. And yeah, we see the story there starting with, step one is having on-chain economies. And that's something like people are kind of vaguely familiar with, and there's good solutions for it. The layer on top of that is on-chain metagame. So it's your character, your progression, your achievements, your profile, all those consequential things kind of sits on top. And there's products out there like PlayFab, which are really commonly used on Akama, used by indie devs and even larger devs to build out their metagame. One of the things MSquared's working on is what we're calling just web3 PlayFab. Okay. What if we have it? So the API is just as easy as PlayFab. The word wallet isn't in it. The word token isn't in it. But you're just saying, oh, this person has this in their inventory and we're handling them getting an on-chain profile. We're handling minting NFTs. We're handling all that stuff for you completely transparently. So yeah, it's giving those sorts of on-ramps. And then once you've got the metagame on-chain, the final step is actually having the entire game be on-chain, including, character movements and pieces. And I think, there are games which are lower fidelity, which that is 100% possible. And then with things like Chunked, we're constantly pushing the boundaries of what is possible. So, even things like RTS-like experiences, which are like mass scale, you could have all that sort of things happening. EVE Online, it's interesting. The update rate of EVE Online is only 1 update a second. The update rate of Somnia is 10 times a second. So, even there, like there are sorts of MMO-like experiences you could start to build fully on-chain.
And I guess the other thing is, in terms of onboarding now, is actually it's sort of been one of my frustrations that onboarding now is pretty good. I mean, for most blockchain games, obviously if you want to go through MetaMask, you probably can, but most of them you just sign in with an email. So, that sort of thing has been solved. But despite what we were thinking 5 years ago, that didn't really solve anything, because that just meant, your day one retention rate was even worse because people signed in and then came straight out again.
What it's also created as well is hyper fragmentation. So when you're logging in with those, like with your Google account to a Web3 game, it's generating a wallet on your behalf for that particular application. Yeah. But there's not really any mechanism to link that part of you with all the other different experiences that you've gone and done. And that's one of the things with MSquared we're focusing a lot on, is the protocols that tie those different things together. So imagine you've got one wallet for Otherside, you've got one wallet for like Shrapnel, you've got one wallet for another experience that you're building. And then there's a mechanism where you can link those different accounts together. And then you can go to the equivalent of like a decentralized Steam page, right? Where you can see your cross-world profile, you can see your achievements and progression across those different things. And also on chain, we can link those different accounts together so that if you have a really cool cosmetic in Otherside, you can use that cosmetic in another experience when you go to a baseball game for Major League Baseball or something. So that's the big vision, and that's probably a good example of where we tie ourselves in, is we're trying to be that connective layer where, given you've onboarded someone really seamlessly onto a single experience, how are you onboarding them onto essentially this open metaverse layer beyond that?
And to sort of say, as far as I understand it, MSquared, is just a technology. It's a Web2 technology, and it obviously works really well with Somnia. But potentially, people could use it with other blockchains as well. I mean, you're not locked in.
Yeah, it's so one of the products we have is an OmniChain indexer, which reflects ownership across all different chains. So we do ApeChain, Somnia, Polygon, Ethereum, wherever we need to. And we also reflect some stuff that's often not respected in a lot of apps, is like delegation. So, you're owning an NFT that might be worth 50 grand. You don't want to have it in your hot wallet, right? You normally have it in a cold storage. And then there are protocols where you can point the NFT at another wallet. So we handle all that with our indexer as well. So you can generally have this multi-wallet identity for yourself. And then you can be bringing that inventory between different places. And our system doesn't care whether, it's on Somnia, whether it's on ApeChain, whether it's on Polygon. It's just another asset you have.
Okay, cool. Okay, so sort of coming to the end now. So where, obviously, Otherside is not your product, so there's probably a lot of things you can't say about it. But in terms of sort of your roadmap for the next sort of 6 months, what sort of stuff should we be sort of looking out for?
So I guess there's a few interesting things on the horizon. Obviously, Otherside, we're continuing to help them with. They're probably better to talk about it, but I'm really excited to see kind of where that project is going. I think it increasingly has a clearer and clearer vision for kind of what it is as an experience, and definitely eager to have them talk about it some more. On the MSquared side, we're currently bringing the MSquared full capability to mobile. So we're going to have it so you can have tens of thousands of people, running around with native mobile apps, which is a really big lift, especially with the new Epic and Apple ruling, right? In terms of allowing different forms of payments, it's a really interesting time to be doing that. And then in terms of our underlying sort of technology layers, we're going to be leaning a lot more into our protocols over the kind of rest of the year. So talking more about our asset network and starting that out. So you have a database of assets you can view and you can use between different experiences. We have our avatars going live. So we have a default avatar, which, teams can adopt really easily and use within this kind of network of places. And then, continuing to work through some of those technologies to sort of broaden what people can do. The way we see it is even social media apps are getting more immersive. They want to start to have things like avatars or lightweight 3D features. We want to be the underlying pieces that people can just pick up and use. Whether you're a game company trying to become more interoperable and become, more connected, or if you're a social app trying to get more immersive, there are different ways of thinking about it, or a web3 application trying to get more game-like and more immersive than just being some trading system. We're trying to sell all the different pieces that kind of tie all that together.
Cool. And keep a lookout for Chunked whenever it goes live.
Oh, and of course, Chunked V2.
Yes.
I think I would get people would be very upset with me if there's not going to be a Chunked V2. So we're hard at work working on that. We've done a lot of optimizations, trying to make sure building mechanics so people don't strip mine the entire world. But that's definitely going to be something that goes live. And there's going to be another one before testnet closes out, and then mainnet. We're thinking about it as a full commercial project as well.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, one of my sons was playing it in particular, but when it was all mined out, he was very disappointed. So he was pleased to hear there was another one coming. So that was
yeah, it's good. Unfortunately, the blocks are immutable. It is the blockchain. We can't make more of them. No. Yeah, for better or worse.
Cool. And actually, a final question, which I should have asked. So we've spoken about sort of the why battle royale games are sort of 100 and 100 people, and you sort of said that you got like thousands, and you mentioned sort of tens of thousands. Is there what sort of would be your rough sort of rule of thumb for what is is there a technical limit these days for getting people into a single sort of space, or is it more to do with how you would design that sort of thing?
Yeah, earlier this year we broke with Yuga Guinness World Record. We got the largest amount of people in a shooter experience ever. I think it's about 2,200 people coming together there. In terms of the rule of what's absolutely possible, if people can't see each other, so if you've just got like a planet, it's infinite basically. Yes. But in terms of the absolute amount of everybody being in one place at one time who can all hear, see, and interact, it's in the order of tens of thousands. We've in R&D hit about 40,000-50,000, and they can all be networked and see each other. But there's sort of a diminishing returns, at that scale. Even getting that many people to show up, on the internet, like you're kind of a top Steam game if you're kind of, you're punching into those sorts of levels of concurrency, especially for an event if it's something that's transient and people kind of coming in. But yeah, really, the sky is the limit at this point, and it really is just about teams making use of that technology and also building games that make sense at that sort of scale. That's all the events we do. They make a lot of sense, when you have lots of people running around, but it's really about like opening up this new book of how do you design games that work at this sort of scale.
That's sort of a nice thing to end on, and lots of the blockchain as well, because I think the games market is in a bit of for various reasons, certainly in the design side, is in a bit of a sort of rut at the moment, not quite sure where to go, and it's getting expensive. But when you start thinking about these very big sort of opportunities, these very big sort of scale opportunities, and I guess. Final question. So, is metaverse coming back? I noticed that you seem to still be using the word. So obviously, you feel that it has a sort of a
I think like there is the idea of like the metaverse as this vanishing point vision for the internet becoming more immersive and becoming more 3D. That is just invariably happening. Like if you look in like apps that aren't about like 3D, they're adding augmented reality features. They're adding like micro 3D worlds and pieces. The term might have not become trendy, but we still talk about it as part of our vision. When we're talking with customers, we talk about virtual worlds, we talk about the immersive internet, we kind of have these other words for it. But yeah, I mean, I've been around now for where it was, a word used in a novel, and then it became cool, and then it was uncool, and then it was cool again. So, words are going to be cyclic, but I was just on Roblox at the weekend doing some research, and you've got multiple million concurrent users playing even a single game on Roblox. Yeah. So people spending their time in virtual worlds is here to stay, especially for the younger generations getting older. They are deeply literate in these spaces, and they're going to want to be enjoying more of them. Maybe it's going to be, the kind of old guard of the metaverses from like the early 2020s. We'll see what kind of happens there. But yeah, this is definitely a trend that's going to be sticking around.
Cool. Thank you very much, Rob, for your time.
Thanks, John.
And thanks to you for watching, listening, however you are consuming the podcast. Remember, every episode we're talking to people who are enthusiastically building out this new way of playing games and integrating blockchains, and still keeping the faith and thinking there's a lot more to come. So don't miss out, do subscribe, and we'll see you next time.